Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live broadcast. Don't derail drug development. 5 common issues to identify and avoid with a first quality process. I'm Jeannie Linky Northrup, Managing Editor with Pharmaceutical Technology, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. We are pleased to bring you this webcast, sponsored today by Syner-G BioPharma Group. We have 2 great experts on the line with us who will be presenting in just a little while, also representing Syner-G. Based in Boston, Massachusetts, Syner-G BioPharma Group is a leading provider of customized CMC, regulatory strategy, medical writing, regulatory submissions, as well as publishing services, as they support pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies across the therapeutic spectrum and complete drug development life cycle. You can learn more about Syner-G by visiting their website, available at www.syner-G-biopharma.com. Before we begin with today's presentation, there are just a few important announcements I'd like to make. This webcast is designed to be interactive, and so we encourage you to ask questions to our presenters throughout the event. You can submit your questions by typing them in the Q&A box, and that can be found at the bottom of your video player. You can also enlarge the slide window by clicking on the small icon in the bottom right corner of your media player. Please note that all slides will advance automatically. And if you experience any technical problems viewing or hearing this presentation, please click on the question mark help widget, which is located in the top right of your presentation window. Now I'd like to introduce today's guest speakers, Syner-G's very own, Bryan Abney and Katie Winder. Bryan is Vice President of Quality Assurance and Compliance and has been a member of the Syner-G team since 2022. He is an experienced pharmaceutical quality professional with 30 years of progressive experience directing quality control, analytical development and validation, product and process remediation, as well as quality assurance. His specialists include deep understanding of analytical chemistry, ICH and FDA guidelines, as well as abbreviated and approved new drug applications. However, his main area of expertise remains in quality management systems. Katie is an Associate Director of Quality and Compliance and has been a leader in the pharmaceutical cGMP environment for 17 years, helping to oversee responsibilities supporting quality assurance and quality control. Her responsibilities have included providing phase-appropriate implementation or improvement in quality systems, as well as guidance and decision-making for quality problems ranging by complexity to the industry based on her experience. So Katie and Bryan, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation and diving into the discussion around quality, as well as the appropriate time to bring in your expertise into the drug development process. So please feel free to get us started.
I also want to welcome everybody that is, joining us today for this presentation. One of the things we want to start off right away is just to get it, the target audience identified. This is intended for those kind of virtual companies, sponsors that are contracting manufacturers and laboratories and so forth. But a lot of the principles that we are presenting today can be applied to novel product manufacturers as well, but that is our target audience. Some of the key learning objectives that we are working on today would be, what are the consequences if your drug product gets derailed? What are top issues that we should be avoiding? And what are the importance and benefits of a strong quality culture? Where in the processes and why should a company consider partnering with a consulting expert early on? This discussion, is going to be focused mainly on GMP, CMC-related quality issues. Clinical issues are also just as important, equally complex, but because of that, there's just not enough time allotted in this discussion to discuss both of these topics. Looking at an overview of quality, what is quality? What does it entail within a drug development process? One of the main things for me, I think, is just making sure that the execution is consistent with regulatory guidelines and your submission. That's a key point. You have submitted documents to the regulatory agencies, and that drug development is always in a constant state of change, and you want to make sure that those submissions and how the things are being currently manufactured, are in alignment. Of course, we want to qualify equipment, instruments, material, people, facilities, ensure that they are suitable for their intended use. Help you manage with the deviations and those unexpected events. Make sure those are properly documented so that when it comes time to make updates to your submissions and write the hopefully you're writing your BLA or your NDA, and you have that full story and understand your process and your product to its fullest. And then of course make sure data is correctly cross-referenced to the source, et cetera, et cetera.
Understanding that quality is super important at this time in this stage in the program. We also are aware that it's complementary to the development stages and the technical parts of the process. So during development, the technical parts explore the process and need to make changes, and it's very fluid. Quality should really partner and not be there to stop that exploratory process, but to be able to ensure that you are in compliance and to ensure that the strategy is maintained so that when you get through the development process and you have a product that's ready to be filed, the quality was already built into that. So really quality should aid with the documentation for all of the information and the strategies that Bryan just went through.
Yeah, to add on to that, I kind of think of quality as that bridge between, production and regulatory, and helping ensure, like I said, before, that the execution is done in a compliant manner, that things are properly documented, and we think about things long term for facilities that or any company that is manufacturing any product. Your end goal is to meet customers' expectations. And those customer expectations could, not only include the patient, but also include the FDA for those of us in the pharmaceutical industry, along with other regulatory bodies. And so, meeting the expectations of those regulatory bodies is kind of that first hurdle to getting things, getting our product to market. Moving on. So, the problem. What are the risks to poor quality? There are repercussions, and cost and time that definitely will impact you. Maybe not as you're going through the process, but when you get to the end and you're trying to make submissions, et cetera, you'll find out that you'll have those have an impact to that process. You may have to repeat a portion or maybe the entire qualification if you haven't done things in a proper manner where the documentation is well well executed. Deviations matter. They're actually expected. The FDA knows that things are going to happen. Deviations often help you understand more thoroughly your production process, help you understand your product better, and how to control it. Often, the best laid plans of the DOE, you deviate from those accidentally, but that information can still be very useful, and can help you with further down the road if you do a proper root cause analysis. Not having a proper root cause analysis definitely leads to that lack of understanding. If you just gloss over that part of the process, or if you and most of the time it's not intentionally, you think you know the answer, but you haven't gone through the process of root cause analysis to ensure that you have considered every aspect of the problem. And that's very, very common mistake, where we go right to, I know exactly what that is. This is the root cause of this. And you do a really good job of telling me why it is, but you've left out 5 other potential root causes and you're not thoroughly vetted those out. Repercussions include, difficulty compiling submission document. So when you get to the end, you have, the FDA is going to ask you for an application, which is, a very complex document. And within that, if you've had poor documentation practice throughout, or if you've not fully vetted your deviations and you come to tell the story at the end, it's going to be difficult to put that document together. No matter how good a technical writers you are, because now you may be 5 years removed from when that event occurred, and you're going to have to try to explain why that is okay. And that, so this is a good business practice part of of having a good quality system. Elongated review cycles. So if you're having difficulties submitting it and writing it, you're probably going to have difficulties with the reviewer getting through that. They're going to be asking questions about why did you do this, why didn't you do that, et cetera, et cetera. And not having good quality practices, good quality processes are going to cause that. If you're first to file, you have a potential loss of market share if you're having delays. Those first to file benefits are significant. If you're putting out a novel drug, or if you're putting out a generic, there are benefits of being first to file the generic as well. So there's potential losses there. And of course, you could eat very easily, if you're a virtual company, you've got investors, you got certain milestones to hit, you could run out of money, and your investors can basically not be happy. And so these are very real issues that companies have to deal with it, because this is a business. So having poor quality is going to impact your business, one way or the other, either delaying or causing you to be denied a submission, or having to deal with the response letters, et cetera. All of that is as a result of poor quality.
Yeah, so just to add on to that, Bryan, there's a reason that they have the ICH Q10 guidance out there that includes development processes as well. The expectation is that you will build that quality management into your systems. You may utilize a CDMO for some of those systems, but it still needs to be there. And so at the end, when they start doing the process for the filing, and when the FDA starts doing the pre-approval inspections, they're going to have their checklist, and they're going to look for those bits of quality systems that they expect to see having been built into your drug development program.
Absolutely. On the next slide we have here are some kind of common reasons. These are the all manufacturing related, CMC related reasons for delays or for a controlled response letter. Just for note, the most common reasons for these are actually on the clinical side, having to do with efficacy and so forth, and designs of the clinical programs. But for those related to CMC related issues, those are inadequate manufacturing processes. That's issues with process validation. You didn't have proper equipment qualifications, controls of your critical process parameters, an understanding around the justification for those parameters and just that general lack of understanding of your process. All of these are built into that manufacturing, and are not only the responsibility of your CDMO to understand these things, but as a sponsor, you need to be able to relay this information within your applications. Additionally, analytical method issues, not adequately validated. I've seen number of times where that the limit of quantitation on impurity method is not adequately validated and gets questioned by the FDA. A clear guideline is provided within the ICH guidances and the FDA guidances on the expectations around that. Yet, the methodology does not support those limits. Inadequate characterization of your reference standard. This is a complicated one, because there really isn't much guidance out there on characterization of reference standards. And part of that is basically because every compound is unique and requires the sponsor's full understanding of the chemistry or biochemistry or or cellular information for that compound and that product. And so putting out a guidance document on that is going to be a difficult task for any regulatory body, because they could very easily leave something out for the next new and greatest advancement in our industry. Lack of comparative data to an RLD, touch on the generics for a little bit. There are reference listed drugs out there, and you have to be able to meet the expected comparative information for that. Data integrity issues. Here's a big bullet for the for right now. I mean, touch point of everything going into not just Part 11 compliance, but then just the cross-referencing practices and capabilities of your overall quality system. Getting to the raw data source with all the metadata that comes along with that, having that continuity between reports and your raw data is critical, and having that where all the have it all assigned where I'm trying to remember the acronym for all the Alcoa Plus. Katie, can you help me out here? Can you remember that out offhand? But anyway, the attributable, legible,
original.
Yeah.
Yes.
But yes. So getting into all of that, certainly there's those are some of the big push buttons for the FDA and the regulatory bodies at this time. Inconsistency of batch to batch quality. Failures to inconsistently meet the specification. Why do you have a specification and you're not meeting it? I mean, that is it sounds kind of obvious, but we've seen issues like that. Lack of robustness. So you have oftentimes in that traditional approach, there's 3 qualification batches, and you can even see inconsistencies within those 3 qualification batches. But then when we start looking back into the history and the engineering batches, et cetera, there's been inconsistencies in productivity and in that process, in the production quality, throughout the entire history of the manufacturing. And so not having robustness in that process, it kind of goes back to not understanding the process, because you don't have control of that process. And then kind of lastly on our slide here, stability issues, insufficient data supports shelf life, impurity profiles, that aren't supported by your toxicity data. So you ran toxicity on a highly pure batch, and then now that you're 2 years old in your stability program, you have impurities that haven't been fully assessed.
Back to the data integrity topic. This is still such a major area of concern for the FDA, and firms continue to try and make these areas more robust. I did have an example. I worked on a project where we had a laboratory investigation, and the CDMO laboratory did not have specific controls in place that are expected. And so what we found out was that through our investigative process, since Bryan was talking about that previously, having a good, robust investigation, vetting out all the different root causes, making sure that was all documented, we did find that they had major issues in their documentation in the laboratory. They were not using controlled laboratory notebooks. There were other inconsistencies with their computer systems. So we had to work through those problems, and it ended up costing time and money in the end for the sponsor. So that's something that you want to take all of these examples of what could be problems when you get to your submission process at the end, and build in prior to that in a proactive way, looking at your quality systems and making sure that these things don't happen at the end.
Yeah, no, that's a great example of some of the data integrity issues that we've seen. We've had another example where Katie and I performed a mock PAI. This inspection, this audit, we found numerous issues with process validation, and as well as facility qualification. So this product was being manufactured in a sterile environment. With the qualifications of the room actually failed the initial qualification. They figured out what was causing the problem, and then did not go back and repeat the protocol. They were running, kind of collecting their normal data, and you can kind of see that that the facility was probably in control, but by not going back and completing the initial protocol, which yes would have cost some time and some money, they haven't fully qualified their facility, and that along with during the PII, we found that their LOQ was sitting at 20%, but the requirement for the specification was less than 0.1%. So obviously your specification and your analytical method validations, they have to align. You can't support, in this particular case, they could not support the specification with their analytical method validation. A lot of this was just could have been uncovered with good, robust sponsor level quality systems. There's a lot going on in these things, and a lot of times your CDMO is I'm not saying they're doing the CDMO is doing a bad job, but they have a lot on their plate, and they're trying to get a lot of things done, and it's all and it's the sponsor's responsibility to ensure that their product is properly validated and vetted. That's just a couple of examples from just this last year. So what are the solutions? Well, quality systems management is very complex. Here's some 5 keys, to kind of help avoid, these issues that we've been talking about. You don't want to delay. You definitely want to start implementing your sponsor level quality systems as soon as you decide you're going to, manufacture a product. Those quality systems can be paper. They can be simple electronic or complex electronic. There are advantages to both. When you have that paper system, I would pretty much only recommend that if you only have 1, maybe 2 programs. You can certainly manage your 1 or 2 programs in a paper system. I've actually was part of an organization that successfully brought a product to market in a paper system, but we only had 2 programs that we were working with at that time. Then there are simple electronic systems, kind of all-in-one cloud-based systems that work, very well, provide you that base foundation, and really have a lot of flexibility. Kind of recommend that point for virtual companies that have very few people to support them from a sponsor level. The more complex electronic QMS systems, they are very, very good, very, very good, very thorough. But because they're complex, they have a lot of gates, a lot of checks built into their workflows, and you need to have the people to support that. And if you don't have the people to support that, they can be very cumbersome. Kate, I believe you were working through a problem just recently with a complex system.
Oh, yes. So kind of 2 sides. So I think for the example that Bryan was alluding to, we've gotten to the point in one of our projects previously that they're ready to file. They went into file, and what happened was, because of a complex system, some things have been slowed down in the process. So you want to make sure, for example, that you have change management, but you don't want to have so many layers of signatories and requirements if it does not require that sort of. So, for example, a simple SOP update or a protocol update doesn't necessarily require a full panel of signatories on that type of change. It could be a simple documentation change. So that's kind of what we're getting at with you need those quality systems, but you need it to be appropriate for the stage that you're at in your clinical program in the phases.
Yeah, and it's, and what can you execute to? If you only have a handful of people, then you can't have 5 or 6 levels of review on every document, and it becomes very cumbersome, very hard for your company to operate in these more complex QMS systems, because that level of view is built into those systems. Looking at SOPs, the SOP should highlight your sponsor's only responsibilities, and then should point to where you're interacting with your vendor, and how your vendor is controlling or is helping you manage certain activities. You want your SOPs to be specific, to what you're actually doing in-house. You want to make sure that your SOPs don't duplicate processes to your vendors, and certainly don't contradict what your vendors' SOPs have. This is actually a pretty common issue with OOS investigations, where the FDA has a 2-part process, and the EU uses oftentimes a 3-part process, and they get to the same end, but your SOPs if they're too specific on your sponsor level, or if they don't align with how your vendor is operating, you can end up in a little bit of a conflict and not understanding how the process and flow should work. So to understand how your partners are operating, align with them. Obviously, they need to be compliant from a regulatory standpoint, but yeah, you definitely want to align with them and not contradict them. Yeah, and then of course, your vendor risk assessment is critical in understanding, exactly how your oversight levels are going to be, and how specific your SOPs are going to be. And then that also alludes to not just your SOPs, but also the system underneath the SOP. How complex is your organization going to need to be to provide that oversight? Can you manage it with just a project manager? Do you also need a quality representative on various calls and conversations? Those types of things. So your resource management, along with your processes around that, and your SOPs, kind of create that quality system. And the complexity of it within your organization, depends on the level of oversight that you need to have on the vendor based upon that risk assessment. Anything else to add, Katie?
No, I think you just want to make sure that you understand what systems you're going to leverage from your vendor, and then build off of that, just like Bryan said. It's very important.
So yeah, moving on, finding that right manufacturing clinical partners. So this is always this probably should have been key number 1 in bold, because this is a person that you're going to be at minimum married to the through the just the development process, and getting yourself to filing. But very often this is intended to be your commercial partner as well, and having that understanding is critical too, because that means that we've seen a lot of times where manufacturers, the CDMO is like, well, we've only done clinical supplies before, and we don't really have intentions of making anything other than clinical supplies. They're not really ready as a manufacturer from able to handle distribution, et cetera, to anything beyond clinicals. That's their niche. And so as a sponsor, now you've got a plan for transfer. Where are you taking this long term? What is the track record of that site? Is there does this site have regulatory issues already listed within the FDA's website? There is a database that you can search on the FDA's website to find out what is the site's regulatory history. Do they have actions that are required of them, and have they been have 483s before that they're having to deal with? This is all part of doing due diligence of your partner. So you a lot of times sponsors will they get the technical part down. Can you manufacture my drug? But the systems behind that the qualifications of equipment, the analytical assessments, the training programs behind that are all critical processes that will be evaluated during the inspection processes, and what can very easily, derail you last minute during a PAI. Anything to add on that, Katie?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, so I think making sure that you're getting those audits done even early on in the process, I think is so important. The example that I gave before about the data integrity issues, they were already dosing patients in phase 1, and we had to actually move them to a different vendor to provide the services. And so that did cost them time. So even right away at the beginning of phase 1, it's a good idea to make sure that you have these quality audits performed, just so you don't run into those problems and find out later and then have to derail or delay.
Yeah, and that example that you're referring to, Katie, I mean, there's still debate, and it's very likely to be an issue where they've lost any of the clinical data that that came from that laboratory. It's very unlikely that they'll be able to use that. So not only have they lost time, but they've lost all that data as well. Building a strong quality culture from the beginning. So if you look into the ISO 9001 and various other quality reference documents, this quality culture is not necessarily specifically mentioned, but it's certainly implied, and it basically starts with your executive leadership team being engaged. They are wanting to see quality related activity metrics measured. They are encouraging that mindset that quality is everyone's job. It may not be the thing that you do from that is your job. You may be responsible for technical operations and ensuring that a process chemistry is providing the most yield. That may be your main job. However, understanding that there's quality principles behind everything certainly helps the quality group within an organization perform better. Developing those key performance indicators for your individual vendors. That can be things like yield. That can be also, are you tracking the number of deviations per batch? Are you how well do they hit their timelines? Those types of things. Those are actually quality, even though they're production performance types of metrics. Those are also quality metrics as well. One of the key things that I do see often in QAA agreements around that is that notification of deviations and events. Oftentimes, sponsors only want to see the major and critical. I'd say see them all. You don't have to approve them all, but just being aware that of the minor events, plus it gives you that ability to say, I don't agree. That actually should be major. I think it's major, and you can have that discussion with your partner as to whether or not it is or is not. And plus, it also gives you a view to be able to assess your vendor on the number of events they are having, per batch. It's a complex batch, could very easily have 10 or 15 minor deviations in it, particularly at development. And you want to see, is that number decreasing, increasing, staying the same? And you can actually have conversations, not necessarily about the individual minor deviations, but the aggregate. What is going on within the quality systems, because that partner is producing the product for you, and they are going to be inspected by the agency, on your behalf. Anything else to add right at this point, Katie?
Yeah, I just want to say to the audience, so if you are in the executive leadership team of your company and you guys are starting out and you're trying to gain insight, obviously, in what should be in a quality system, what we love and what we recommend to our clients, just ask the questions. If we recommend that you do this, say, can you tell me a little more about why? That really helps build that quality culture also, because you're gaining that insight into why the decisions are made the way they are, kind of that quality strategy, and how we are trying to help you get from development into a filed product with that quality built in. So it's always important to ask those questions.
Yeah, and then having that quality expert, moving into key point number 5, have the quality expert from the beginning, is I think is very critical. Whether that person is internal or external to your organization, having someone with the that experience, and capabilities within quality, I think is very, very, very critical to the success of that. And speaking to that, it doesn't, very early on, quality activities are kind of, they ebb and flow. And so you could have weeks where, you need a quality person for, full time, but then, you could be in a lull where you're in clinicals, or you're not in production, et cetera, and you don't need someone. So hiring someone internally can be a burden and not within the capabilities. So looking to that for that expert outside does, can provide certain advantages as well. Within our organization, not only would you have, access to quality experts, but also technical experts as well. Anytime that there are issues, we can rely on, a large number of experts to help us with providing the best quality answer, to the or quality solution to a particular problem. So those are some of the benefits, even if if by looking at an external resource for quality early on, ultimately it helps build that foundation too, for once you do move to an internal quality person, you've got that, good, robust quality systems built in, from the beginning. So it's easier for the person that you hire internally. So starting strong with quality, what do you look for that quality partner? These first two bullets, can they say no? Can they say yes? They're kind of intertwined. Quality has to be able to have that firm line of, being able to say no. That person has to have the fortitude and the ability to, to not bend, and they have to be in alignment with that, with your head of the company. That, and looking, in saying no, sometimes it's like, no, not yet. So you have to be able to, you may be delivering bad news, but you're also helping to find that solution to get them to that point. Sometimes it's just, you know what, it's no, not yet, because we don't have the regulatory, paperwork in alignment with what you executed to. And so it's not that it's a critical issue, other than, you may have had a deadline with a clinical partner. Now you're going to have to negotiate, getting back into that clinic or for something like that. So it's no is a critical word that quality sometimes has to utilize. Yes is also a critical word, especially in development. You're at quality, we have to recognize that it is a development stage. A lot of us in quality have come through commercial organizations, and the rules are a lot different. Their processes are not validated at early stages, and we have to be able to understand that. And our role is to help get the unvalidated process to a validated state and have it well documented, and helping the technical organizations understand, how to get it to that place. Can you build, quality systems?
When we were looking at, let's just go back to the example of the laboratory. They were unable to build internally their own laboratory system that was sufficient for the investigative process and for documentation and data integrity. And so when you're looking for a quality person to help you manage these sorts of things, you want to have somebody that not only can build the systems, but can also build them so that you're not roadblocked, right? So that it's appropriate to what you need for that stage of the process. Also, for the example of the change control with one of the other projects that I was working on, the change control system was just too rigid. They couldn't move, they couldn't develop. And so this is also very important to have a conversation with the quality person that you're looking to utilize. What is their take on implementing the quality systems in a development stage? Phase 1, phase 2, it needs to be appropriate for those stages and utilizing what the vendor has as well.
No, very, very, very good point. And I think very true. A truth to this as well as for me is that quality systems is more than just the SOP. Quality systems, it starts a little bit with the SOP, but it also starts with the people and processes that you have around that. And that whole system of going from point A to point B, connecting the dots between X and Y, in an organized fashion, that's the system. And building that, sometimes the resource isn't just having a single person for writing that SOP, but then you also, once you write that SOP, you're committing to following that process, and you have to have personnel or systems in place to have that process be executed. But it's very critical to the success of many, many projects. One of the key roles within quality, they have to be able to understand and facilitate investigations and deviation. This is one of the most, probably the most highlighted aspects of quality, is helping mitigate these types of situations. Understanding, root cause analysis tools, not just a single FEMA, that may not be appropriate for the stage that you're in, but getting to root cause during a single investigation is obviously the goal. Sometimes it's not always realized, but then being able to connect the dots between two events that may have had, you thought you had the root cause, but then now you didn't, and you had it again. You always want to avoid that situation as much as possible, but even when it happens, getting that proper documentation in place so that in the end, when you're ready to file, when you're ready to tell the story about your product, you can tell a complete story. You can demonstrate that you have full understanding of the processes. You have full understanding of the validation of the of every aspect of your process and your production and your equipment. And then of course there's the management of the documentation on that. Obviously, that's another key aspect of quality, making sure that we're getting things done in a timely manner. A lot of times in development, that timely manner is hinging around, when's my next clinical trial starting, and does my regulatory documents need an update? And then of course helping you mitigate those regulatory risks. So quality can be that person that's talks to your regulatory person and helps you mitigate that risk. And then of course, here's the advantage of hiring a firm similar to Syner-G. You don't get a single consultant. We have a team of experts, 250 persons strong, with varieties of experiences, and we can utilize that, throughout, any type of, critical event or investigation, whether it be, a deviation or just coming up with the proper strategies, for the program. Moving on, and just a little bit more about Syner-G. We are life science organization, across, regulatory continuum from concept to commercialization. Deep scientific expertise in production development, process scale-up, global regulatory affairs. Syner-G offers a full complement of product development, quality, and regulatory services across the spectrum of strategy, execution, and management, and submission support. Let you finish up the rest of that, but I want to thank everyone for their attendance today. I hope you got a lot out of it, and look forward to any questions you might have.
Bryan, Katie, thank you so much for such a great presentation. A lot of great insight came out of this. I am actually starting to see some questions populating from the audience. But before we get started with our question and answer session, for anyone who may have joined in a bit late, I'd like to just remind our audience how they can submit questions to you both. And so audience, you can submit your questions to both Katie and Bryan by typing them in the Q&A box, and that can be found directly below your video player. And with that, we'll get ready to ramp things up. Okay, our first question. And this may be something I think both of you can answer, but we'll start with Bryan's response here. Bryan, how do I better engage my leadership on quality issues?
That's a very good question. And this really comes, for me, it comes down to relationship building. When you learn, when you're being hired and you're interviewing with a company and stuff like that, you're getting that first clue into building that relationship and understanding what is the priorities of the leadership. Once you're there and you're dealing with influencing and directing that, making quality issues a critical part of the engagement within the ELT. That comes part with like gaining trust and being able to present and show the importance through data. I always feel like that data is really really important in that because it can't just all be gut feeling and the sky is falling types of scenarios. Showing the data, and also showing how easy the process can be, and giving the value of showing the value of good quality practices, and at the beginning of how that can actually benefit the company through lack of repeat work and so forth. Okay, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I just want to add on to that. I think that really, as long as they understand the reason why behind, a lot of times, that's enough to get them to becoming, on board with the situation. But they do want to know the data. They do want to know the cost and the timing and everything. And that's fair for their, obviously for their position. But it's always going to be less time spent building it in ahead of time and just having those conversations than going down the road and finding a major issue that you have to fix.
Right. I find that really, really critical during those events where it is, you're in the moment and there is a fire to put out. The technical folks are saying, this is the cause, this is the cause. How do I get them to, take a step back and fully evaluate and document everything that they've already eliminated in their mind? Because that's, they've gone through the process in their mind, well, it can't do this, it can't do that. Get them to document that rationale in that process, to show that they've done a, full, quality assessment of the situation.
Thank you both. So I know we were talking earlier about keeping things less complicated, right? Especially when it comes to maybe changes and making sure that things are simplistic. So one of the things that came up in question was about minimum. I know we mentioned minimizing the SOP, making it simple. What are the minimum SOPs for an early phase, like a phase 1 or 2 project?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think the answer, unfortunately, it depends. But at the same time, there are some some key considerations. So as a virtual company, you have vendors. So right away, I can definitely say, vendor qualification, auditing program SOP is absolutely one of the first ones you need to have. It's kind of debatable whether or not you want to put a quality policy in there at early phases. I feel like it's a really good idea. How you're going to handle change control, how you're going to handle deviations are probably the three biggest ones at that moment. And then I guess right off the top of my head, another one would be just general batch release. And then, of course, there's, we're covering kind of the CMC side of things. There's the clinical side as well, which, just briefly talk on, we talked about vendor selection, similar type of, site selections there, as well as your, getting your, IRBs, selected, qualified, et cetera. So there's minimum types of SOPs on both sides. Of course, that's kind of what we specialize in, kind of our work product. Would be glad to, kind of, walk a company through that. We kind of generally have, prior to human dose, we have about 10 SOPs we recommend. Rattled off several of them just now. As we move in, the next stage we're looking at is moving in, what do we want to have in place prior to qualification? So we're getting into our validation types of SOPs and those types of oversights and development. And then as we move into commercialization, it's getting further and further into packaging and labeling and other things like that. So it starts to expand pretty quickly at that point, and hopefully that's obviously the end goal. So so Katie, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so it's obviously a fine line, right? Because we talked about not wanting to roadblock development because you need to make changes and adjust the process and things like that along the way. But it's also essential to have something. And so what Bryan has mentioned is that, our team proposes a tiered structure to implementing these SOPs, and then each SOP themselves can grow with the stage that you're at. So if you're at phase 1, and let's just talk about change control, it may be a very brief SOP that describes how you're going to leverage your CDMO and things like that. But, we have that built out, and we can have those discussions with people if they're interested in that.
Fantastic and really important, right? I mean, especially when you start highlighting available resources and we think about such a complex process, the risks and things that may lead to change control. So it's nice to hear how Syner-G is helping kind of align those things and keep things simple, right? So the next question, we're thinking about the entire process here. At what phase do we need to bring in a quality professional? When should somebody start building out their quality management system? Should it be right away?
Yeah, I think we kind of covered that in the kind of the opening slide. Sooner rather than later. What that quality professional may not need to be full time in these earlier stages. There are ebbs and flows to the manufacturing processes and stuff like that. And so, what we'll see is there'll be, a bolus of hours that are needed to establish the quality system, get the initial batches released, and then it'll dwindle down to just, kind of staying in touch with the client, see when the project is, for the period of months while it's in clinic. And then as, you start seeing success in the clinic, you start preparing for the next stages. And I do want to, stress that it's prepping for the next stage, not getting to the next stage and going, oh my gosh, let's throw in a bunch of SOPs on top of that, because you want to be thinking ahead of time as to, how you want to proceed with, validation and so forth.
And Katie, I know you were in agreement. Was there anything else you'd like to add?
I think that just, having somebody to be there as a partner to strategize with, especially in the very beginning. If you engage too late and you bring in a quality professional and you're already well into your phase 1, like we were talking about earlier, you can run into some major issues that will delay the process, which obviously costs money, and nobody wants to run into that. So like Bryan said, it may not be a full-time hire on your team, but you can bring in somebody as needed to have those discussions as you go through the different gates of the process.
That's great. Thank you. So we are quickly approaching the hour. We will have time for one more question, but I still have a few that have come in. I want to remind our audience that both Katie and Bryan will be reviewing all of the questions offline as well. So if you sent in a question to either of them today and it was not responded to live, they will respond offline and get back to you. That said, our last question here, maybe one of you or both of you can, maybe one of you can define what is a CRL, and maybe the other can kind of talk a little bit more in depth about its importance here with quality.
Go for it, Katie.
Yeah, so CRL is a complete response letter. And this is something that you really don't want to receive when you're going to the process of filing your product. So this basically is the FDA saying we're not able to approve your filing for such and such and such reasons. And a lot of those can be prevented by building in these appropriate phased quality systems that we've been talking about this whole time. Making sure that if you're leveraging all of your CDMO's quality systems, that you are actively engaged in those, reviewing those records, reviewing the changes, making sure that you get the opportunity to sign off on, major and critical items, making sure that you have oversight of all the inventory, reference standards, all of those things, so that you don't get to the end and when you're filing, you receive the complete response letter. Bryan?
No, yeah, and a lot of these, issues that are resolved in a complete response letter, these are, highly technical issues. And then you have to ask yourself, questions like, how did we get there? And it's like, a lot of times it's, that lack of full oversight, and partnering with those CDMOs and those partners. And that, constant interaction between what is the regulatory expectation and, what are we executing to? And a lot of it has to do with just resolving problems. We've seen many of the ones we've looked at this year. We knew there was a problem going in and it was unresolved. Well, why was it unresolved? And that's a standard quality issue. Leaving a problem unresolved, going into the submission.
Yeah, definitely. Why? Why did you proceed that far, right?
Right, exactly.
Thank you, Bryan. Thank you as well, Katie. Both of you, great insights today. Really great points. Just really provides a lot of insight into why you want to think about all of this right away up front and partner right away, right?
Exactly.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate your time as well. I also want to thank our audience. I want to thank them for their questions to you, as well as their participation and time today. And of course, I would like to thank our sponsor, Syner-G BioPharma Group, for making this educational webcast possible. As we close out this program, before we all click off, I would just like to ask all of our audience members if they would kindly participate in a brief survey. The survey is going to appear on the screen just after today's presentation has concluded. You'll also receive an email alerting you once this webcast is available for replay on demand, and we invite you to forward that announcement to your colleagues who may have missed today's live event. So again, Bryan, again, Katie, again, our audience, thank you all for your participation today, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye, thanks.